Well, hello everybody and welcome to Jeff's Baking Blog. Today I'm going to be making some steak slices or steak bakes. So it's going to be 2 layers of puff pastry with some steak and a little bit of onion in gravy on the inside. They're quite simple to make if you use shop bought puff pastry. You can make your own puff pastry, and I'm using homemade puff pastry, and I will have a video that I'm going to put online to show you how to make that if you want to do it. But if you want shop bought, that's fine. And there's not very many ingredients for this. It takes a little bit of time because you need to slow cook the meat until it's nice and tender and the gravy or the sauce thickens around it. So I'll go on to the ingredients, and for this I have 400 grams, which is about 12 ounces of beef steak, which I have cut into fairly small pieces. It will shrink down during cooking, but we need small pieces to go inside our puff pastry. Then I have 500 millilitres of beef broth or beef stock. I have 1 onion which I have cut up very finely. I have a couple of bay leaves to add flavour, and then I have 2 tablespoons of plain flour, and into that I put a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper and mix it around. And I also have 2 teaspoons, 10 millilitres of Worcester sauce. You don't need to use Worcester sauce if you don't want to. And here I have 600 grams of my homemade puff pastry, which I'm going to roll out later, but that can go back in the fridge because we don't need that yet. And then I have extra salt and pepper should I need it once I've cooked the beef down. So the first thing I'm going to do is to put my flour and salt and pepper mixture into the meat, and I'm going to toss that around to get the meat coated. And that's good enough like that. Make sure each piece is coated in the flour. Oh, I should say I also have 1 egg which I'm going to use to make an egg wash to go on the top. So the next thing I'm going to do is to fry off this meat in a pan so that it's browns on the outside, and then I'm going to add the onion and cook that for a couple of minutes as well before we go on to put the stock in. So with some oil in the pan, I'm going to put half of the meat in, and I'm going to brown it and then do the other half as well. And I'll stir that around, and I'll turn it and turn it over and toss it around until it's browned all over. That'll take 2 or 3 minutes. And for cooking this meat, you can either cook it on the stove top on a low heat once you've added the stock and got it simmering, or you can put it in the oven at 150 degrees, 350 Fahrenheit, 180 Celsius, and you can cook it in the oven with a lid on for about 2.5 hours. The choice is yours. I'm going to cook mine on the stove top. So that meat has browned now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in my finely chopped onion, and I'm just going to cook that for a further 2 minutes so that the onion sweats down just a little bit. and that's fine. Those onions are now quite translucent, so I'm going to put my bay leaves on and I'm going to pour in my stock, and I can see my stock cube didn't fully dissolve, so I'm going to stir that around just to dissolve that. And I'm going to add in my Worcester sauce as well and stir it around, and I'm going to bring that up to a boil so that I can then simmer it. So that's now just starting to boil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a lid on that, and I'm going to reduce the heat and let it simmer away for 2 to 2.5 hours until the meat is nice and tender and the gravy has thickened up. At this stage you can do the same by putting it into your oven and cooking it with the lid on, cooking it for about 2.5 hours. It's been just about 2 hours in fact, and I've been simmering my beef, and the gravy has thickened quite nicely. I won't need all of that gravy, and the beef is nice and tender because I've tested it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the bay leaves. I also did check the seasoning and added a little bit more salt into mine. And I'm then going to put this into a bowl and allow the meat and the gravy to cool down completely. And then when it's cooled down completely, I'll come back and we'll prepare the pastry and fill it and then bake. So my cooked steak and gravy has cooled down. I've got it in the fridge for the time being, so because I need to roll out my pastry. Now I did some checking, and it seems that in the UK at least, the sheets of puff pastry that you can buy are usually about 35 centimetres by 23 centimetres, which works out at about 14 inches by 9 inches. And so if that's the case, if you just roll them a little bit longer, you'll be able to get 6 little rectangles out of each sheet that you will use, and I would recommend 2 sheets, and they will then be sort of 4.5 inches by 5.5 inches, so that when you've trimmed them there'll be maybe 5 by 4 inches, but you can make them whatever size you want to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to preheat my oven to 190 Celsius, that's 170 Celsius with a fan, 375 Fahrenheit, and I will roll out my pastry so that I can cut out my rectangles. And I'm going to roll my pastry out on the cling film that it was, or the plastic wrap that it was wrapped in, and I've got some flour just in case I need to flour the surface of the pastry. But we need to roll it into a rectangle, quite thin, about so that it's about the size of the ones that you can buy in the shop. And so I've rolled that out to a rectangle of about the size of those sheets that you can buy. And I should say that I'm only using half of my 600 gram block of pastry here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these in half. like that, and I've halved that sheet, so I've taken off one half, and I'm going to cut this one into 3 pieces of about 12 centimeters, and I'll do the same with the others. So as you can see over here, I have done one of my steak slices just to check that I got the process right. So I'll do one to show you, and then I'll do the remainder for myself. So I'm going to brush around the edges of one sheet with some water, and then I'm going to take what amounts to about 2 tablespoons of my filling and spread it onto the centre of the pastry. You don't need too much filling in these, just like that. And I'm going to take another sheet and place it on the top. Peel off the parchment. Then I'm going to press it down all the way round. Like that. And then with a fork, which I'm going to keep floured, I'm going to press the edges together with using the tines of the fork. And then I'm going to brush all over the top and onto the edge of the, where I've pressed it down with my beaten egg, into which I've added just a little drop of water to loosen it up a little bit. Like that. And then I'm going to trim the edges off. You don't have to do this, but I want to do it. Like that. So then, with a very sharp knife, I'm going to score diagonal lines about 1 centimetre apart across the steak slice. Like that. And because it's on parchment paper, it's easy to lift up, and I'm going to put that onto the baking tray like that. And I'm going to do the same with the remainder of my pastry. So I have 6 of my pastries rolled out, the steak slices. Here's 3 of them. I've got 3 on another baking tray. I'm going to put those into the oven, and I'm going to bake those on that 190 Celsius, 170 Celsius with a fan, 375 Fahrenheit, for about 25 minutes. The pastry should puff up and go a nice golden colour. Then I take them out of the oven and allow them to cool down, and I'll come back and show you the results. So I cooked the steak slices for 25 minutes. I took them out of the oven and transferred them to a wire rack to cool down. Now you can eat them hot, of course, and you can eat them cold. It's entirely up to you. You can also reheat them one time. Not more than once, but one time. So this is what they look like. And I've cut one open so you can see inside it as well. And I'll have a taste of the one that I've cut open. It's got that lovely buttery puff pastry, and then the rich gravy that's surrounding the steak, and the steak's nice and tender. Very, very good indeed. So that's going to be it for this recipe. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, please give me a thumbs up below and click to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In the top right hand corner of the screen there will be an eye that you can click on, and that will take you to a link for this recipe, and I'll put a link below the video as well, and I'll be back with another recipe in the very near future. So until then, happy baking.